My name is Lauren Whitaker. I'm 38 years old, and I still can't fully explain the kind of damage people can do when they decide a child's love is inconvenient. It sounds too small when you say it that way. Too neat, too harmless. Like maybe it was only a scheduling problem, a misunderstanding, one bad family dinner that got blown out of proportion. That's the story my parents would have preferred. But that isn't what happened. What happened was that my 13-year-old daughter gave 4 full days of her life to make my father feel celebrated, and my parents threw that love away like it was clutter on a countertop. And when they saw what it had done to her, they still cared more about being right than being decent. My daughter's name is Emma. She's the kind of child who takes things seriously in a way that can break your heart if you're not careful. Not because she's fragile, because she's sincere, because when she loves someone, she does it with her whole body, like devotion is a language she was born already knowing. Weeks before my father's 60th birthday, I told her we'd be hosting the party at our house, the same way we usually handled family gatherings. 32 people. A loud, messy, familiar crowd. My husband, Nathan, was already talking about moving patio chairs in from the garage. I was making grocery estimates in my head. It all felt normal. Emma, of course, turned it into a mission. She didn't want to help. She wanted to run it. I can do the food, she told me, standing in the kitchen with both hands flat on the counter like she was presenting a business proposal. Not one dish, all of it. I laughed at first because I thought she was joking. She wasn't. She came back 20 minutes later with a notebook. An actual plan. Menu ideas. Ingredient categories. Timing notes. Tiny stars next to possible allergy issues. She had written Grandpa's favorites at the top of one page and underlined it twice. Nathan tried to talk her down gently. Honey, that's a lot. 32 people is basically a catering job. She lifted her chin. Then I'll cater it. There was something so earnest about the way she said it that neither of us had the heart to shut her down. We warned her it would be exhausting. We told her she could scale it back. We told her no one expected this from her. But Emma wasn't doing it because anyone expected it. She was doing it because she wanted her grandfather to feel important. Wanted him to feel chosen. That was the part that kept replaying in my head later. Not the food, not the party, that. For 4 days, she worked like someone twice her age. I watched her make spreadsheets. Real spreadsheets. She color-coded dishes by temperature and prep time. She wrote down which relatives had allergies, who hated onions, who liked extra spice, who would need a kid-friendly option. She priced ingredients. She adjusted quantities. She asked Nathan to drive her to 3 different stores because one place had better strawberries and another had the mini jars she wanted for lemonade. She made sliders, baked pasta, fruit skewers, homemade chips, dip, mini quiches, 3 kinds of cupcakes, and things I'm probably still forgetting. She tied little tags around the lemonade jars with people's names written in careful handwriting. She printed menus and tucked them into napkin rings she made herself out of twine. She even wrote a short speech for my father and kept editing it because she wanted it to sound warm but not too cheesy. That was her phrase. Warm but not too cheesy. At one point, I stood in the doorway and just watched her working. Her hair was tied up in a crooked knot, flour on one cheek, concentration narrowing her face into something older and softer all at once. Nathan came up beside me and whispered, "She's going to remember this forever." At the time, I smiled. I thought he meant in a good way. The night before the party, Emma was still moving around the kitchen close to bedtime, checking lists, reorganizing trays, fixing one bent place card like the whole event would collapse if she didn't. She finally went to bed with her speech cards on the pillow beside her. At 10:47 p.m., my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen and saw my mother's name. For one stupid second, I thought maybe she was sending some sentimental message about being excited for tomorrow, maybe asking if we needed ice, maybe saying thank you. Instead, the text said, "Plans have changed. We're celebrating at a restaurant, adults only." That was it. No explanation. No apology. No, I know Emma worked hard. No, we're so sorry. Nothing. Just a bland little announcement like she was rescheduling a dentist cleaning. I stared at the screen long enough for it to dim in my hand. Nathan was loading the dishwasher when I handed him the phone. He read it once, then again. His expression changed in a way I'll never forget. Not confusion, not even anger at first. Just disbelief so pure it looked like he'd stopped understanding how language worked. "What does that even mean?" he asked quietly. I shook my head. There was another message in the family group chat a minute later. A restaurant address. A reservation time. A little champagne emoji from one of my cousins. No one asked about us. No one mentioned Emma. Nathan leaned against the counter. Are you answering? I looked toward the hallway, toward Emma's bedroom door, closed and peaceful and innocent, and something inside me hardened. No, I said, because what exactly was I supposed to say? How do you respond to people who knew a child had spent 4 days preparing food for them and still made a decision like that at nearly 11 o'clock the night before? We didn't tell Emma that night. I couldn't do it. Maybe that was cowardly. Maybe I just needed a few more hours before I watched her heart crack open. But I let her sleep. Let her have one last night inside the version of reality where people meant the love they accepted from her. The next morning, she was already in the kitchen before I came downstairs. Not just awake, working. She had her notepad out. Her heating schedule was written in columns. She was adjusting serving order and muttering to herself about oven timing. One of the place cards had bent overnight, and she was smoothing it carefully with both thumbs. She looked up when she heard me. What time do you think everyone will start getting here? She asked. There are moments in life when you know whatever comes next will divide everything into before and after. That was one of them. I walked into the kitchen and stood there longer than I should have. I could hear Nathan behind me, but he didn't interrupt. He knew. I said very carefully, they moved the party. Emma blinked. What? To a restaurant. She frowned, like maybe she'd heard the sentence, but not the meaning. Okay. After here? I swallowed. No, just there. The silence that followed was so still I could hear the refrigerator humming. Then she asked, So everyone's not coming? Her voice was calm. Too calm. I hated that more than if she'd screamed. I told her the rest. That Grandma had texted late. That it was supposedly adults only. Emma just stood there for a second holding that bent place card. I think part of her was waiting for the punchline. Waiting for me to say I was kidding. Waiting for the world to slide back into place. When it didn't, she nodded once, set the card down, and walked past me without saying anything. A second later, her bedroom door closed. Not slammed. Closed. That somehow made it worse. Nathan exhaled hard through his nose and dragged a hand over his face. I stayed in the kitchen, staring at the trays of food, the labels, the tiny jars lined up in rows like proof of something no one had deserved. About an hour later, we heard her crying through the wall. Not loud. Not theatrical. That quiet kind of crying children do when they're trying not to be heard, which somehow hurts more because it means they already understand shame. Nathan moved first, but I touched his arm. Let me. When I got to the hallway, he sank down beside Emma's closed door anyway, his back against the wall. I sat across from him on the other side of the narrow hallway floor. Neither of us knocked. Neither of us tried to make her talk before she was ready. We just stayed there. That kind of silence weighs more than yelling ever could. We didn't go to the restaurant. We didn't call. We didn't answer the group chat when it started filling with photos and jokes and stupid little updates like everything was normal. Someone posted a picture of the cake. Someone else posted a photo of my father holding up a champagne glass, grinning. Later, I checked Facebook. I wish I hadn't. The restaurant was full. Everyone was there. Plates of pasta, bottles of wine, smiling faces. My father looking celebrated, my mother looking pleased with herself. And there were children at the table, Emma's cousins. Same age, same generation, same family branch. So much for adults only. That lie did something final inside me. It wasn't about changing plans anymore. It was about exclusion with intention. They had looked at Emma's effort, at her place in the family, and decided she was easy to cut. Not the other children. Her. Emma didn't come out until dinner. We reheated some of the baked pasta she'd made for a party that no longer existed and sat at the table eating in near silence. She didn't speak, just moved her fork through the food and stared down like there might be an answer hidden there. I wanted to say something wise, something healing, something a mother is supposed to say when her child has just learned that love from family can be conditional and ugly and cheap. But every sentence felt too small, so I stayed quiet. Sometimes that's all grief lets you do. 17 hours after the restaurant dinner started, someone began pounding on our front door. Not knocking, pounding. The kind of violent, impatient fist slamming that makes the whole house feel personally accused. Nathan looked up from the couch. I looked down the hallway toward Emma's room. The pounding kept going. I already knew who it was before I got there. When I opened the door, my parents were standing on the porch like we had wronged them. My father looked irritated, not ashamed. My mother launched in before I'd said a word. You could have at least told us you weren't coming, she snapped. They had to rearrange seating. Do you know how awkward that was? No hello, no apology, no mention of Emma. I just stood there with one hand on the door and waited. My father folded his arms. This didn't need to become a whole thing, Lauren. A whole thing. Behind me, Nathan had come into the entryway, silent and steady. I asked, "Did either of you think to call Emma?" My mother blinked like the question itself was inconvenient. "She's upset, I'm sure, but—" "But what?" My father gave the tiniest shrug. "It's not that big of a deal. She's a kid." I remember every detail of the moment after that. The porch light catching the hard edge of his jaw. My mother's offended expression. The cold air slipping in around the frame. Nathan going completely still behind me. It's strange how calm rage can feel when it finally arrives fully formed. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I just looked at both of them and said, "You need to leave." My mother stared at me. "Lauren, no. No, leave." My father's face darkened. "You're seriously doing this over a dinner?" I held his gaze. "No," I said. "I'm doing this because of what you did to my daughter." And then I shut the door in their faces. My mother was still talking when it closed, but I didn't care enough to hear the words. They stayed outside for another minute or two, muttering, their shapes moving behind the frosted glass. Then finally, they left. Nathan came up behind me and rested one hand lightly against my back. "That won't be the end of it," he said. "I know." And I did know. What I didn't know yet was how easy the next decision would feel by comparison. The following morning, I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee, opened my banking app, and canceled the automatic payment I'd been sending every month. For 6 months, I had been covering rent for my younger brother Jake, his wife Melissa, and their son, $1,200 a month. No questions asked. My parents had come to me when Jake hit a rough patch, job loss, medical bills, everything piling up at once. They said they were tapped out, asked if I could step in until he got stable. I had said yes, not because I had extra money lying around, because he was my brother, because family was supposed to mean something. But as I stared at the confirmation screen telling me the transfer had been canceled, all I could think was this. I was done funding people who could watch a 13-year-old girl cry behind a closed bedroom door and still call it no big deal. That night, Jake called. His voice sounded confused, tired. "Hey, the rent payment didn't go through." I leaned back in my chair and looked toward the kitchen, where Emma was quietly frosting cupcakes she no longer planned to give anyone. "There isn't going to be a 7th month," I told him. He was quiet for a second. Then he said, "Okay," and hung up. The next morning, they came back. Not just my parents this time. Jake was with them. I saw all 3 of them through the front window before the pounding even started, my mother clutching her purse in both hands like she was arriving for a funeral, my father already red-faced, Jake standing half a step behind them with that same tired, uncomfortable look he'd worn for most of his adult life whenever our parents turned a conversation into a performance. Nathan was in the hallway when I opened the door. He didn't say anything. He just stayed close enough that I could feel the steadiness of him at my back. My mother started crying before I could speak. Real tears, maybe. Convenient tears, definitely. "Lauren, please," she said. "We need to talk about this before it gets worse." My father didn't bother with softness. "You canceled Jake's rent over a birthday dinner?" There it was again. The same reframing. Not Emma. Not humiliation. Not the lie. Just a dinner. Jake rubbed the back of his neck and looked past me into the house, like maybe he was hoping this could somehow resolve itself without him being forced to stand inside it. I stepped aside just enough to say, "You have 5 minutes." They came in like people entering enemy territory, stiff and offended, looking around the living room as if the furniture itself had taken my side. Nathan stayed near the hallway entrance. Emma was in her room again. I knew because her door was shut, and there was no music coming from inside. Before all this, she used to play music when she cooked, when she studied, when she got ready for bed. Now the house kept catching on that silence and snagging there. My mother sat first. My father remained standing. Jake hovered near the armchair and finally lowered himself into it with the expression of a man who already regretted showing up. "Your brother has a child," my mother began, her voice trembling in that familiar way she used when she wanted grief to do the work guilt couldn't. "Whatever issue you have with us, don't take it out on them." I looked at Jake. "Did you know why I canceled it?" He looked down at his hands. "They told me you were upset." "Upset," I repeated. My father threw his hands out. "Because you are upset. This whole thing is ridiculous." That word landed harder than shouting would have. Ridiculous. As if Emma's 4 days of work were silly. As if her crying behind a closed bedroom door was melodrama. As if their lie had been clever instead of cruel. Nathan crossed his arms. "You don't get to come into our house and talk about our daughter like that." My father turned toward him with immediate irritation. Like the fact that my husband was speaking at all offended him. This is family business. Nathan's jaw tightened. "I am her family." For 1 second, I thought my father might actually keep pushing at him, but Jake spoke before he could. "Can we just focus?" he muttered. "Please?" My mother seized on that. "Exactly. We're here because this has gone too far. Jake and Melissa are barely hanging on right now. Their rent is due. Their son needs stability. You made a commitment." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because the hypocrisy was so naked it felt unreal. "You want to talk about commitment?" I asked. "Emma committed 4 days to that party. She planned everything. She cooked for 32 people. She wrote Grandpa a speech." My mother closed her eyes briefly, already weary with my insistence on dragging the truth into the room. "We know she worked hard," she said, in the tone of someone humoring a child. "No," I said. "You don't. If you did, you wouldn't still be talking like this." My father stepped forward. "It was one dinner, Lauren." I looked at him and waited. He said the line I should have expected by then, but it still made my stomach turn. "She's 13. She'll get over it." The room changed after that. Not dramatically, not loudly, just permanently. Jake stared at the carpet. My mother sniffed into a tissue. Nathan looked like he wanted to physically remove them from the house, and I felt something inside me seal shut with a cold, final click. I said very evenly, "You need to leave." My mother's face crumpled. "Lauren, don't do this." "I'm already doing it." Jake finally looked up. "So that's it? You're just done helping?" I turned to him then, really turned to him, because buried under all the anger was something older and sadder. "Jake," I said, "I helped because I thought when things mattered, family mattered to you too." He flinched. Not dramatically, just enough for me to know the sentence had found the right place. My father jumped in before he could answer. "Don't put this on him. He didn't do anything." And maybe that was true in the simplest sense. Jake hadn't sent the text. Jake hadn't invented the adults-only lie. Jake hadn't stood on my porch and dismissed Emma to my face. But he had gone to that dinner. He had sat at that table. He had watched the restaurant fill with people while my daughter sat at home crying over food she made out of love. And after all of it, he had still come here to ask me for money before offering one word to the child who had been hurt. "That's the problem," I said quietly. "He didn't do anything." Jake's shoulders dropped. For a second, I thought he might argue. Instead, he stood. "Come on," he said to our parents. My mother stared at him. "Jake, just come on." My father muttered something ugly under his breath, but he followed. My mother gave me one long, devastated look, like she wanted me to understand that her pain should matter more than the damage she helped cause. It didn't. I walked them to the door and opened it. No yelling. No slammed hands. Just the end of tolerance. When the door shut behind them, Nathan let out a slow breath and leaned his head back against the wall. "That felt worse somehow," he said. "Because they still don't get it." "No," he said, "because they don't want to." He was right. That was the thing I kept inching closer to in my mind, but hadn't fully named yet. Ignorance can change. Carelessness can be corrected. But this was something uglier, a refusal, a choice to keep protecting their own comfort even when the truth stood directly in front of them. 2 days later, I found out Jake and Melissa had moved into my parents' house. Not temporarily either. Not for a week or two. A real move. Their things packed, their son's toys crammed into boxes, all of them under one roof now, with my parents and their chaos and their money problems and their talent for turning every room into a pressure chamber. When I heard it from a cousin, I stood in the kitchen for a long time holding my phone and staring at the sink. Nathan came in and asked, "Are you okay?" I nodded first out of habit. Then I shook my head. Not really, because I knew what that house was like. I knew what it meant to owe people like our parents anything. How quickly help became leverage. How generosity came with sharp edges hidden inside it. How every meal, every bill, every small kindness could be brought back later as evidence that you were ungrateful, weak, impossible to please. Jake had grown up there too, but he'd always survived differently than I had. I pushed back, he folded. I left emotionally years before I ever did physically. He stayed soft where I got hard. He made peace. He absorbed blame. He told himself keeping quiet was maturity. Now he was back inside the machine. Emma still didn't ask about any of it. That hurt in its own separate way. Kids usually ask when they're trying to understand. When they stop asking, it often means they've decided understanding won't help. A few days passed in a strange, heavy silence. Then my bank sent me the failed transfer notice for the canceled rent payment, right on schedule. I barely looked at it. I deleted the email and moved on. That night, a little after 10, Jake called. No hello. No small talk. The payment didn't go through. I sat at the kitchen table, one hand around a mug of tea that had already gone cold. I know. A pause. Then, you really canceled it. Yes. He exhaled, and in that breath I could hear everything he wasn't saying. Panic, pride, shame, anger he didn't fully know where to put. "All right," he said finally. Then he hung up. The next morning, they were back. All three of them again. This time, my father looked openly furious. My mother started crying almost the second I opened the door. Jake looked more exhausted than ever, like sleep had become something that happened to other people. "We have no savings left," my mother said. "Your father can't keep covering everything. Jake's little boy is in that house. You cannot be this cold." My father pointed a finger at me before she even finished. "You are punishing your brother for something he had nothing to do with." Nathan had heard them by then and stepped into the entryway, but I held up a hand slightly to stop him. I wanted to handle this myself. I looked at Jake. "Did you apologize to Emma?" He blinked. "What? Did you apologize to her?" His mouth opened, then closed. My mother jumped in. "This again?" "Yes," I said, turning toward her. "This again. Every single time, until one of you acts like what happened matters." My father made a disgusted sound. "It was just a dinner. Why are you being so dramatic?" There are sentences people say that expose more than they realize. That was one of them. Because no decent person could say that after seeing the aftermath. After hearing Emma crying. After knowing the adults-only excuse was a lie. After seeing us refuse to attend and still never once reaching out to ask why. It was never just a dinner. It was a message. "You are expendable. Your effort is embarrassing. Your love is useful only when it flatters us." I could have said all that out loud. Instead, I said, "Leave." My mother's crying shifted instantly into outrage. "You are tearing this family apart." "No," I said. "I'm finally refusing to hold it together by myself." Jake stood there frozen, looking between us like he'd wandered into a fire he still couldn't believe was hot. For one brief second, I saw the boy he used to be, the kid who'd hover in doorways during our parents' fights, waiting for the safest mood to attach himself to. He had never learned how to choose a side without feeling like he was betraying someone. But adulthood doesn't keep giving you that excuse forever. He chose, even if the choice was passivity. And passivity has victims too. I shut the door. Not hard, just finally. After that, I stopped opening it for them. 2 days later, Melissa texted Nathan. Not me. Not a long message, just 7 words. "Your parents are toxic, I get it now." Nathan showed me the screen without saying anything. I read the words twice, then once more. I wasn't surprised exactly. More like grimly confirmed. There's a strange ache in being validated by someone else's suffering. You don't want them hurt. You just want to stop feeling crazy for having been hurt yourself. I knew that house was unraveling. I could picture it too clearly. My mother complaining about groceries and noise and space. My father criticizing Jake for not finding better work fast enough. Melissa trying to keep their son quiet so he wouldn't set your father off. Small resentments ripening into daily humiliations. I didn't hear it from Jake directly, but I didn't need to. I'd lived enough of the script to know where it was going. So I decided to show him something he had never fully let himself see. That afternoon, I went through old texts and emails from our parents. Years of them. I didn't need to search hard. They had left a trail everywhere. Messages where my mother called Jake irresponsible. Emails where my father said he was weak, unreliable, hopeless with money, a burden who would ruin his son's future if someone didn't keep stepping in. Casual cruelty wrapped in concern. Judgment disguised as family problem-solving. The kind of things they'd never say to his face when they needed him compliant. I took screenshots and dropped them into a message thread with Jake. No introduction, no explanation, just truth. For almost 2 hours, nothing happened. Then my phone rang. "Jake!" When I answered, he didn't speak right away. I could hear movement in the background. A door shutting. Wind. Maybe he'd stepped outside. Finally, he said, "Thanks." His voice sounded flat, but not numb. More like someone who had just found out a structure he leaned on his whole life was made of painted cardboard. "I didn't know," he added. And something in me softened then, just a little. Not enough to undo everything, not enough to excuse him, but enough to remember he had been raised inside the same damage I had, and he'd never been as good at surviving it. "No," I said quietly, "I know." We didn't say much else. There wasn't much else to say. The next few days were quiet. Then Saturday morning, my phone buzzed with another text from Melissa. We left. That was it. No details. No dramatic retelling. But details reached me anyway, the way family information always does. A cousin heard from a neighbor who heard from another cousin that Jake and Melissa had packed in the middle of the night, loaded the car while my parents were asleep, took their son and what they could carry, and drove to a friend's basement apartment. No plan. No safety net. Just out. The practical part of me winced immediately. That kind of move is terrifying when you have a child. Reckless, even. But another part of me understood exactly why they'd done it. Sometimes leaving badly is still better than staying where someone teaches your child what contempt sounds like. The first week was rough, from what little I heard. Jake picked up construction cleanup work, long hours, filthy jobs, not enough pay. Melissa found a remote admin gig part-time and started taking whatever hours she could get. They were exhausted. Their son was confused. Money was still tight enough to keep everyone tense. But for the first time, the tension belonged to their circumstances, not to my parents' moods, not to their approval, not to the invisible tax of pretending abuse is just how family is. Late that week, I got a text from Jake. I finally get it. You were right. I stared at the words for a long time, not because I wanted the satisfaction, because I didn't. There's nothing satisfying about someone you love finally understanding your pain only after being forced through his own version of it. Emma never knew about the rent, never knew about the screenshots, never knew how closely her grandparents' cruelty toward her connected to the whole rotten structure they had built around all of us for years. But a few days later, something arrived in the mail for her. A card, handmade. Inside was a drawing from Jake's son. Stick figures, bright markers, a tray of cupcakes in Emma's hands, hearts floating over the page in the chaotic way little kids draw emotions they haven't learned to spell yet. Under it, in clumsy handwriting, was one sentence. Thank you for cooking. You're amazing. Emma stood at the counter, reading it, while I tried very hard not to let my face give away how much that small kindness undid me. She looked at the drawing, then at me, and for the first time in over a week, she smiled. Not fully, not the old easy smile, but enough. Enough to let in a breath of hope. That night, after she went upstairs, Nathan found me in the kitchen, rinsing dishes that didn't really need rinsing. You okay? He asked. I nodded, then laughed once because that answer had become such a reflex it barely meant anything anymore. She smiled, I said. Nathan leaned against the counter. Yeah. I set the dish towel down and looked at the dark kitchen window, at my own reflection hovering there. My parents are alone with themselves now, I murmured. And I think that might be the first real consequence they've ever had. Nathan came over and kissed the top of my head. They earned it. Maybe they had. But the strange thing about family is that even when people earn the fallout, some broken part of you still grieves that they chose it. Still, grief didn't change the facts. Jake and Melissa were gone. Emma had smiled again. And my parents, for the first time in their lives, were stuck inside a house where there was no one left to absorb the cost of being them. I thought that might be the end of it. I was wrong, because by the following week, the story had started spreading beyond our front door, and once the rest of the family learned what had really happened to Emma, everything changed. It started with one cousin asking a simple question. Why didn't you come to the party? That was all. No accusation, no drama, just curiosity wrapped in a message I almost ignored, because by then I was so tired of the whole thing that even typing the truth felt exhausting. But something about the wording got to me. Maybe because it was the first time anyone outside the immediate mess had asked instead of assuming. So I answered. Not the emotional version. Not the version sharpened by rage. Just the facts. I told her Emma had spent 4 days preparing food for 32 people. That she'd planned the menu, tracked allergies, made name tags for the lemonade jars, printed menus, written Grandpa a speech. I told her my mother sent a text at 10:47 the night before saying the party had been moved to a restaurant and was now adults only. I told her we found out later there were kids there after all, including Emma's cousins. I told her Emma cried in her room while everyone else smiled for pictures over pasta and champagne. Then I put my phone down and went back to rinsing strawberries at the sink because Emma wanted to test a cookie glaze after dinner. 3 hours later, that same cousin posted screenshots in the extended family group chat. Not my screenshots, the actual text from my mother, and a short summary of what happened. That was the match. The explosion came fast. Messages started hitting my phone from aunts, uncles, cousins, even relatives I hadn't spoken to in months. Some asked if it was true. Some didn't even ask. They just apologized immediately, horrified that they hadn't known. A few admitted they'd wondered at the restaurant why Emma wasn't there, but my mother had brushed it off, saying we changed our minds at the last minute and wanted a quiet weekend instead. That part seemed to make people angrier than anything. Not just what my parents did. How deliberately they lied about it afterward. One aunt wrote, "She made place cards for us. She showed me one when I stopped by last week. Your mother let me sit there and smile at her after all that." Another cousin sent, "I saw the kids at the table. There was never any adults-only rule. No, there wasn't. There was just Emma. Emma was the one they'd decided didn't fit. And once the family understood that, something shifted hard and fast. My Aunt Sherry texted my mother something so blunt, one cousin forwarded it to me in disbelief. "You humiliated your granddaughter and lied to all of us. Don't contact me again." A few days later, the reunion planning email chain quietly dropped both my parents from the list. No announcement, no dramatic family vote, just removal. That stung them more than any screaming match could have. My parents loved being central, hosting, organizing, controlling the tone of every family event so they could curate the version of themselves people saw. Without that, they didn't know who to be. My mother started calling people. No one picked up. My father, in what I can only assume was an act of wounded ego disguised as wisdom, posted something vague on Facebook about how families should stick together instead of tearing each other apart over misunderstandings. Comments were turned off within the hour. Even that felt like him, wanting sympathy without risking accountability. Jake stayed mostly quiet during all of this. He and I weren't suddenly close again. There was too much history and too much recent damage for that. But we were speaking in cautious little increments now. Messages about work, about whether Melissa had found more hours, about his son adjusting to the basement apartment. A week after they left my parents' house, he texted me a photo of his first paycheck from the construction cleanup job. Not a huge amount, but enough. "First honest week in a while," he wrote. I looked at that message longer than I expected, because there was pride in it. Real pride. Not the brittle kind our father performed. Not the manipulative kind our mother borrowed whenever she wanted praise for surviving consequences she created. This was quieter, rougher around the edges, but real. A few weeks later, Jake and Melissa moved out of the basement and into a tiny rental. Small bedrooms, bad carpet, a kitchen barely wider than a hallway. But it was theirs. I told him I'd help with the deposit. He refused. "We've got it," he said over the phone. "We need to do this on our own now." There was something different in his voice. He sounded straighter, not happier exactly. Life was still hard, but he sounded less like someone waiting for permission to exist. Emma didn't say much about the wider family fallout. In some ways, that worried me more than if she'd kept asking questions, but little pieces of her old self were beginning to return. One evening, she asked if Jake's son could come over for dinner. "Of course," I said. She nodded once, already halfway into planning mode. That Saturday, she made the sliders again, the same ones she'd made for my father's birthday. At first, I wondered if that would hurt her, if recreating the food would bring the whole night crashing back down on top of her. But when I walked into the kitchen and saw her at the counter, music playing softly from her phone, hair pulled back, concentration glowing through her face again, I understood. She wasn't recreating the loss. She was reclaiming the joy. Jake's little boy sat on a stool swinging his legs and asking 1,000 questions, while Emma explained what made the buns toast evenly and why you had to season the meat before shaping it. Nathan kept pretending to inspect quality and stealing fries off the tray until she swatted at him with a dish towel. For the first time in weeks, the house felt alive in the right ways again. After dinner, I stood in the doorway while Emma cleared plates and listened to her laugh at something the boys said. Nathan came up beside me. "She's coming back." I nodded, but there was a lump in my throat too thick for words. The truth was, I had been afraid some permanent light had gone out in her. Not because one family dinner mattered so much in isolation, because betrayal during tenderness leaves a mark in places logic can't reach. She had offered something beautiful and been taught that beauty could be discarded for optics. That's the kind of lesson I never wanted her learning at 13. And yet here she was, stubborn and luminous in the aftermath, teaching herself another one. That what is rejected in one place can still be cherished in another. As for my parents, the silence around them kept widening. No one was talking to them. Not me. Not Jake. Not most of the cousins. Not even the relatives who used to indulge their gossip because it made them feel included. Once the facts were out, even the people who might normally have defended them ran out of language. There are some stories that expose a family's moral center. This was one of them. A month passed without a word from either of them. And the quiet felt strange at first. My mother used to call constantly, about detergent sales, about what she should make for dinner, about church drama, about neighbors she pretended to pity, while clearly enjoying the spectacle of their lives. That constant static had always been there, this hum of herself she expected everyone else to absorb. Then suddenly it was gone. Not just for me, for everyone. No tagged photos, no birthday group texts, no meddling, no updates, no little manipulations disguised as concern. I heard from one cousin that at church they had started sitting in the back row and leaving immediately after the final prayer. No lingering, no chatting, no easy orbit of people around them anymore. My mother tried once. An email. 3 lines. "We didn't mean to hurt Emma. This is being blown out of proportion. Can we talk?" I deleted it. Not because forgiveness was impossible. Because accountability without honesty is just another performance. Jake got one too. Longer. Worse. She tried to pin everything on me. Said I had stirred things up, manipulated the family, poisoned him against them, turned a misunderstanding into exile. Said they missed their grandson and didn't deserve to be treated like criminals. Jake forwarded it to me with one sentence. They haven't changed. No, they hadn't. That was the part they never understood. This was never about one party. It wasn't about food. It wasn't about a restaurant versus a house. It wasn't even about the lie by itself. It was about who you choose when there is nothing to gain from choosing them. Emma had loved them openly, without calculation. She had worked for them, thought of them, planned around them, celebrated them with every ridiculous, perfect little menu card she tied and folded. And when the moment came to honor that, they chose appearances. They chose convenience. They chose themselves. They could have fixed so much if they had simply come to her, looked her in the eye, and said, "We were wrong." Instead, they minimized, deflected, reframed, and protected their pride like it was worth more than her heart. Kids know when love isn't real, even if they can't explain how they know. One Sunday morning, Emma and I went to the diner she likes about 15 minutes from home. The place had cracked vinyl booths, uneven salt shakers, and pancakes the size of hubcaps. She was flipping through her little recipe notebook while waiting for our order, talking about a cooking competition at school she wanted to enter. "I'm thinking lemon rosemary cookies," she said, "or maybe brown butter shortbread if I can make it not too boring." I smiled. "You are literally 13 and already saying things like, 'not too boring' about brown butter." She grinned without looking up. "It's a serious issue." I was about to answer when I saw them. My parents, sitting near the front window. No food in front of them, just coffee. My father was staring outside like he wanted to be anywhere else. My mother saw me almost immediately. Her hand lifted in a small awkward wave, not quite a greeting, not quite a plea. I didn't wave back. Emma hadn't noticed them yet. She was still talking about cookie textures and whether judges cared more about originality or execution. I let her finish. I let her stay in that small safe bubble for as long as I could. When we got back to the car, she buckled in and then glanced toward the diner. "Was that Grandma and Grandpa?" I started the engine. "Yeah." She was quiet for a second. Then she asked, "Do you think they're still mad?" The question hit me somewhere deep and tender, because only a child would look at people who had hurt her and still wonder first whether their feelings were okay. I pulled out of the parking lot before answering. "No," I said softly. "I think they're just sad now." And that was the truth. Not because I suddenly pitied them more than they deserved, but because sadness was all that was left once control stopped working. That diner table wasn't just breakfast. It was consequence. 2 people sitting in the middle of a life they had emptied with their own hands. A few days later, Jake forwarded me a mass email our parents had sent to the entire extended family. Long, dramatic, full of phrases like misunderstandings and broken hearts, and the pain of being cut off by your own blood. Emma's name wasn't in it once. Not once. At the end, they wrote, "We love our family. Please don't shut us out." Only one person replied, our cousin Mark. His message was one line. "Did you ever apologize to Emma?" There was no answer. After that, things only got colder for them. Invitations stopped entirely. Group chats disappeared. Birthdays came and went without their names attached. Even the people who once excused everything, "Your dad is just blunt. Your mom means well. They're old-fashioned. They don't always say things right," fell silent because silence was easier than trying to defend the indefensible. Meanwhile, Jake kept moving forward. Still exhausted. Still juggling too much. But steadier. Melissa's Etsy shop picked up real traction. Jake started talking about trade certifications. They were building something that didn't depend on guilt or rescue or pretending our parents' dysfunction was the same thing as family loyalty. Emma got into the school cooking competition. When she practiced recipes, she invited Jake's son over to test them. The 2 of them would sit at the counter dusted with flour, arguing over icing and laughing too loudly at nothing. One night I caught her humming while she worked. The same tune. The one she'd been humming the night before my father's birthday while tying tags onto lemonade jars for people who never deserved them. I froze when I heard it. Not because it hurt. Because it meant the music was back. The light was back. My mother was not. I ran into her one last time at the grocery store, alone, pushing a cart that looked almost empty. She seemed smaller somehow, tired, thinner. She stood by the entrance for a few seconds like she was waiting to recognize someone who would be glad to see her. No one came, and standing there with a carton of eggs in my hand, I realized something that settled the last of my anger into something colder and clearer. My parents were not alone because we had punished them. They were alone because over years and years, they had trained love to leave. Months passed. Emma took second place in her school competition with lemon lavender shortbread that made one judge ask if she'd ever considered culinary school. Jake landed a warehouse job with benefits. Melissa's Etsy shop turned into a real business. Life wasn't perfect, but it was finally ours. Then, one afternoon, Emma opened a letter at the kitchen table, saw the handwriting, and slid it silently across to me. It was from my mother. And for the first time since all of this began, the words inside didn't sound like an excuse. The envelope had no return address. Just Emma's name written in my mother's careful cursive, the same handwriting that used to label holiday gifts and birthday cards, the same loops and curves that once felt warm and familiar. Emma turned it over in her hands for a second before opening it. No hesitation, no fear, just curiosity. She pulled out the folded paper and started reading right there at the kitchen table. I watched her face the way you do when you know something important is about to happen, but you don't know which direction it's going to break. At first, nothing changed. Then her eyes slowed. Her fingers tightened slightly on the page. After a few seconds, she looked up at me. Not upset, not angry, just unsure, and slid the letter across the table. "Can you read it?" she asked quietly. I took it, and I wasn't prepared for what was inside. It didn't start with justification. It didn't start with excuses. It didn't start with that familiar defensive tone I had spent most of my life learning how to decode and dismantle. It started with this. "I don't deserve you reading this, but I hope you do." I read the rest slowly, carefully. Like if I rushed, I might miss the part where it twisted back into something manipulative. But it didn't. Line by line, my mother did something I had never seen her do before. She told the truth. She admitted they changed the party because they wanted something nicer, something that would look better, feel more impressive, something they could show off without worrying whether a 13-year-old's cooking would be taken seriously. She admitted they knew how much work Emma had put into it. She admitted they told themselves it didn't matter. She admitted they lied about the adults-only rule because it was easier than explaining what they'd done. And then came the line that made my chest tighten in a way I couldn't immediately explain. "I saw your face when you realized no one was coming. I have been seeing it in my sleep ever since." I stopped there for a second, because that sentence didn't feel like performance. It felt like consequence. Real consequence. The kind that doesn't care whether anyone forgives you or not. The kind that shows up anyway, uninvited, in the quiet hours. I kept reading. She wrote that she had been trying to protect an image of my father, of the event, of the kind of celebration she thought people expected, and in doing that, she destroyed something real. She called her own actions selfish, cruel. She said she would never forget what she had done, even if Emma did. There was no request for forgiveness. No, please call me. No emotional bargaining. Just this. "I failed you, I am so sorry." And then it ended. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back on the table. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Emma picked it up again, ran her fingers lightly over the crease, then folded it once more, neater this time, and set it beside her notebook. "I don't know what to do with this," she said. Her voice was steady. Not cold, not soft, just honest. I nodded. "That's okay," I told her. "You don't have to decide anything right now." She held my gaze for a second longer, like she was checking whether I really meant that, then gave a small nod and stood up. "I'm going to put it in my desk," she said. "Okay." She walked down the hallway, her steps quiet but not heavy, the way they had been weeks earlier. A few seconds later, her bedroom door clicked shut, not in the same closed-off way as before, but gently, like she was just moving on to the next part of her day. I stayed at the table a while longer. The letter sat in my mind like something unsettled. Not dangerous, not comforting, just different. 2 days later, Jake called me. His voice sounded strange. Not tense, not defensive, thrown off. "I got one too," he said without preamble. I leaned back in my chair. What did it say? "A lot of the same stuff," he answered. "But more. More how?" A pause. Then, she admitted things I didn't even know she remembered. I could hear him moving around, like he couldn't sit still while talking about it. "She wrote about how they used me," he continued. "Money, pressure, all of it. Said they made me feel like I couldn't stand on my own, so I'd keep coming back. Said she knew it was happening and didn't stop it." I closed my eyes briefly. That was new. Jake let out a slow breath. It didn't feel like manipulation, he added. That's the weird part. I kept waiting for it to turn into something else, but it didn't. I understood exactly what he meant. That instinct to wait for the hook, the twist, the moment where sincerity reveals itself as strategy. I don't know what to do with it either, he said. You don't have to do anything, I replied. Not yet. Yeah, he murmured. Yeah. We sat in silence on the line for a few seconds. Then he said, quieter, do you think they've actually changed? I looked out the window at the backyard, at the faint movement of leaves in the afternoon light. I think I started, then stopped. Because I didn't want to lie to him. And I didn't want to give him something to cling to that might break again. I think something is different, I said finally. I just don't know what it means yet. He didn't push for more. Okay, he said. After we hung up, I stayed where I was, letting that answer settle. Different didn't mean fixed. Different didn't mean safe. But it wasn't nothing either. A week later, Mark called me out of the blue. We weren't especially close, so the suddenness of it made me pay attention. I heard something, he said after a quick hello. About what? Your parents. I waited. They've been going to therapy, he continued, regularly, for a while now, apparently. That caught me off guard. How long is a while? I asked. Months, he said, quietly. No one knew. I leaned forward slightly in my chair. And? He hesitated. Someone from their church mentioned that your mom had a breakdown during one of the group sessions. Like, couldn't stop crying. Kept saying she didn't know how to fix what she'd ruined. I didn't respond right away. Not because I didn't believe him. Because I didn't know what to do with the image. My mother, who had spent years controlling every room she walked into, sitting somewhere she couldn't manage the narrative, crying without an audience she could influence. It didn't fit the version of her I had carried for so long. Or maybe it did, and I had just never seen it. I figured you should know, Mark added. Yeah, I said quietly. Thanks. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, because as much as I wanted to dismiss it, wanted to protect myself by assuming this was just another cycle, another attempt to regain footing, it didn't feel the same. There were no Facebook posts. No vague guilt messages, no sudden calls asking to talk things through. Just silence. An effort happening somewhere I couldn't see. Emma hadn't said much since the letter. But I noticed things. The way she would sometimes open her desk drawer and glance at it. The way she'd read a few lines, then close it again. Not obsessively. Not painfully. Just thoughtfully. Like she was turning it over in her mind at her own pace. She hadn't responded. Neither had Jake. And I hadn't either. But something had shifted. The anger that had been sharp and constant in my chest for weeks wasn't gone, but it had softened at the edges. The need to defend every boundary with force had eased into something steadier, something that didn't require constant vigilance. The pain was still there, but it wasn't consuming everything around it anymore. One evening, I found Emma in the kitchen testing a new recipe, something with lemon and herbs again. She was measuring carefully, humming under her breath, the same tune I'd heard weeks earlier when she was preparing for a party that never happened. I leaned against the doorway. Trying something new? I asked. She glanced up, smiled a little. Yeah, I think I can make it better this time. I nodded. I think you can too. She went back to measuring, focused and calm. And standing there, watching her, I realized something I hadn't been able to see clearly before. This story had never really been about my parents. Not in the way they would have wanted. It was about Emma. About what she gave. About what she lost. And about what she chose to keep anyway. Love. Creativity. Effort. The parts of herself that hadn't been diminished by being rejected. My parents had broken something real. That would always be true. But they hadn't destroyed everything. Not even close. Later that night, after Emma went to bed, I sat on the couch with Nathan, the house quiet around us. Do you think they deserve another chance? He asked softly. I didn't answer right away. Because the question wasn't simple. Deserve had nothing to do with it. And chance didn't mean the same thing it used to. I think, I said slowly, if anything happens, it has to be on Emma's terms. Nathan nodded. Yeah. And even then, I added, it won't look like what it was before. No, he agreed. It can't. We sat there in silence after that. Not heavy silence. Not the kind that presses down on your chest. The kind that just exists. Steady, earned. For the first time since everything had happened, I didn't feel like I was bracing for the next impact. I didn't feel like I needed to anticipate the next manipulation or defend against the next dismissal. I just felt still, like the worst part of the storm had passed. Maybe not everything was fixed. Maybe it never would be. But something had shifted. Something real. And for now, that was enough.